Welcome back to the Crime Classroom. This is the Real Nathan Daly, and this is a new update. We're going to be diving into the Karmelo Anthony, Austin Metcalf case. And this case is very sensitive. A lot of people are struggling with trying to understand the nuance of this case. Some people believe I've taken a position and I have not taken a position. You guys here at the Crime Classroom, we just analyze cases, and I give you my perspective as a former law enforcement officer and a current expert witness. So let's talk about something that a lot of people have interest in. We're going to talk about self-defense. We're going to talk about how self-defense and use of force is examined in a courtroom. What things are we looking at? Many people misunderstand this case. They believe because Karmelo Anthony had a weapon automatically makes him guilty. Automatically means that his self-defense claim is invalid. You don't necessarily become ineligible for self-defense because you had an unlawful weapon. Imagine that. This doesn't mean that he's not guilty or can't be found guilty. It just means that he still has a self-defense argument to make. What did I say before? I said that the police report that we have is a preliminary investigation. It's missing over 70% of the evidence in the case. We need to hear from Karmelo. We need to know the evidence. We need to know what he saw. We need to know the rest of what the witnesses saw. And we need to put this puzzle together so we have a proper understanding of what we're looking at. On the surface of everything, I'm not going to lie, it looks unreasonable for a person to use a knife in an attack against one person on the surface. It doesn't look practical. It doesn't look reasonable. It looks excessive on the surface. One thing I can tell you about how these things work and how they play out in court is that if you don't have all the facts, then you cannot make a determination. And until we have all the information, at least 95%, it's going to be very difficult to tell whether or not Karmelo Anthony has a self-defense claim. Or did he perceive a threat that did not exist? Well then, of course, and that's a problem. Okay, then we're still looking at manslaughter. Or did he intentionally do what he did, you guys, and we're looking at first-degree murder. Either way, there's not enough information on the police report to say that it is first degree. And there's not enough information on the police report to say that this is not self-defense. And because of that, let's talk about what self-defense looks like and how I would examine it if I was given this case. This is the classroom, you guys. Leave your feelings at the door. Let's talk about the facts. How is a self-defense claim examined when the police and investigators or defense attorney is looking at the totality of the circumstances? What does that mean, the totality of the circumstances? What are all the mitigating factors that make this self-defense? Nothing is what it appears to be. And you can't examine evidence on the surface alone. You got to get below that. You got to look at all the intricate pieces that make up the bigger whole that gives us the idea of what we're actually looking at. You guys, for example, we look at the environment. Let's paint the picture. Karmelo's job is to paint the perfect picture for self-defense. Then it's the state's job to find ways to break through the defense and prove to the jury that there was no self-defense. If they cannot do that, then he walks, you guys, on a self-defense claim. They might charge him with possession of an unlawful weapon, but he beats the case under the guidelines of self-defense. You have to prove that you were in fear of receiving great bodily harm or death. This is Texas law. It's not necessarily about proportionality. That's one part of it. That's what's argued in a courtroom about, was this proportional according to the threat that the person received? But what people have to remember, that the perception of the person, what they believe is their reality, but the reality still has to coincide with the actual real events. A reasonable person has to believe if they were in that situation that they would be in fear for their life. So what are we looking at? The environment. This altercation took place on bleachers. Bleachers are dangerous, you guys. The defense is going to argue that this person is surrounded by a potential hazard. All going up the bleachers, going down the bleachers. If you slip and fall on the bleachers, I believe they were metal. But that is also a factor that's going to be considered, whether you like it or not. What's another factor? People don't like to hear this one. Height, weight, body size. These are factors that are considered in self-defense claims. If you are going against someone and the attacker is bigger than you, they weigh more than you, they're more muscular than you, that matters. If they're taller than you, that matters. What else matters? If we're talking about physicalities, well, are you injured in the time of you having to use self-defense? That matters. Were you injured after being assaulted initially in that encounter. That matters. If you were pushed and you hit your head, or if you were pushed and you dislocated your arm, twisted your ankle, and now you have to stand back up and put yourself in a defensive posture, does that matter? Yes, you guys. These are what we call mitigating circumstances. These are the little details that add up to make a bigger picture. Well, one can argue, what is the proper size? Well, we don't know, right? These things are going to be argued by the defense and say, listen, my client was outmatched. He was outgunned by the threat. What's the other issue? If the person believes that this is a multi-threat situation, what do I mean by that? If there are multiple people involved, it doesn't matter if they're not armed, you guys, you're always armed. You have these right here, these are weapons. And if you use them inappropriately, they become deadly. This is a fact. And so you also have to take in consideration that if there's a multi-level threat, where there's more people involved, that ups the ante. You're able to use a weapon as a threat equalizer. It doesn't necessarily have to be a knife. It could be a rock. It could be a book. It doesn't matter. It could be chopsticks from your bag. It doesn't matter. If you use it as a weapon to deliver lethal force, it can be considered a deadly weapon. So what's the other issue that we consider in self-defense and use of force? Well, naturally, if the other person has a weapon and you don't have one, well, that matters. Also, the behavior conducted by the person, meaning, did they assault you? Did they grab your items? Did they physically try to remove you from a place that you lawfully had a right to be in? You guys, all of these things are factored in.
What happened?
There was this kid, before I knew his name now, this kid was sitting under our tent at track. We asked him to move. He started getting aggressive and talking reckless. And my brother stepped in and said, you need to move. And he's like, make me move. Austin grabbed his backpack. The kid, I tried to whip around as fast as I could, but I didn't see the stab. But then I looked at my mouth.
And according to this case, Austin tried to grab and take Karmelo's bag from him. Well, one can argue that that puts you in a more fearful position, especially if you believe that they're able to actually carry it out. This is also another form of assault. So the question is, how was a person feeling when all of these actions were taking place? Why did this person feel fearful? When did that fear start setting in? At what point did that person decide that it was in their best interest to go in and grab a weapon? That's the key. It's not so much that the person grabbed it, it's when they decided to grab it, what was said when they grabbed it, before and after, what actions happened before and after, before the decision was made to grab the knife. That is the key to this entire case. That, and also words. Words have power. Words have a lot of power in self-defense. What I mean by that, you can utter words of threats of harm against another person. If that person believes that those words are going to come to life, that you're going to actually act those words out, you plan on carrying out the threat that you threatened me with, you guys, this will increase my self-defense claim. For example, if I say, hey, I'm going to kick your teeth in, I'm going to take your head and smash it on these bleachers, guess what? And then you walk with intention to try to carry that action out, whether you're going to do it or not. You made me believe that you are going to do it. In that moment, you guys, the fear response kicks in. And then now my self-defense claim increases. Your words have powers. And we see this again with the incident in New York with Jordan Neely and Daniel Penny, where you only have to utter words of threats of violence against people, though you may never touch them. But if they believe that they're in fear of receiving great bodily harm or death, you have a right to defend yourself. This is the power of words, whether you like it or not. And in the totality of all these things come together, paint the picture of self-defense. A lot of people overlook this when examining a self-defense case, you guys. But when I'm examining a case, I'm looking at everything all the way down to nonverbal communication. I'm looking at body language. I'm looking at subtle gestures on one person over the other. What does that mean by nonverbal communication? You guys, unfortunately, you don't have to threaten people with words alone. As an officer, when encountering people that you're engaged in and you're getting ready to make an arrest, and as you're talking to them, they do what? They ball their fist up. That means something. They pull their pants up and start buckling and tightening their pants. That means something, right? You have an incident, for example, you have two women in a bar and one of the women is talking a lot of trash and the other one is just taking it all in. She's very quiet, but she's angry. She doesn't like the insult, doesn't like the disrespect. And what happens next? She decides that she's gonna start doing this. And she's taking off jewelry. What does that mean, you guys? And the ladies watching this video, what does that mean? You don't have to say anything, but what does this mean when you start doing that? You didn't say anything, but you're making a statement without verbal communication. A lot of people overlook the nonverbal communication when examining self-defense, when examining use of force. This is what I'm looking at. When I ask my client, hey, paint me the picture, show me what happened with your words. I need to know all the details, all the way down to how they were standing up, how they were moving around, how they were walking around you. That matters because it goes to how you interpreted the events during that encounter. Hey, I was looking at the brothers and the way they positioned themselves made me believe that they were positioning themselves to do what? To surround me. The way this took place made me feel like this was going to take place, or this was going to happen, or they were going to do this, or he was going to do that, or she was going to do this. This is how you examine an actual self-defense scene. I want to know all the intricate details, and even the ones that you don't think are important tend to be the most important. Even in Georgia, when you see two young men about to fight, the first thing somebody decides to do is what? Take off their shirt, right? You don't have to say anything, but to two men, we know exactly what that means. If me and you were squaring up and you're stupid enough to take your shirt off in front of me, guess what that means to me? That means you're ready to fight. You didn't have to say anything, but that's what you're doing. You're preparing yourself for battle. That's a nonverbal cue that lets me know that I need to brace myself because this person is preparing. On movies, we used to see the guys used to make their chest jump, right? They go in, they show up, they're getting ready to fight. It's supposed to be a form of taunting without having to say anything, right? If I walk up next to you and I do this right here, what does that mean? Right? What does that mean? So we don't know what type of nonverbal communication took place in this case. That's important. But these are the things I'm going to ask as an expert use of force for this case. I want to know, were there any nonverbal gestures that we need to know about? Because that can mean a lot. How do you translate that to the jury? I can express an entire fight scene to a jury and never have to open up my mouth and say what happened and what took place and what does this mean? And guess what? This also, putting your hand in the bag and bracing yourself, that's nonverbal communication. That means I'm preparing myself to defend myself, and then I make a statement about, hey, touch me and see what happens. Punch me and see what happens, you guys. This is how you build the case. Lastly, one of the most important keys to kind of tie this whole thing together is understanding how the strike was delivered. This is important when examining self-defense and use of force claims. What do I mean by that? I want to know how the strike was actually delivered onto the victim. I want to know, was a strike going forward, lunging overhand strike, where he's going down, striking downward, or was he going backwards when he delivered the strike? That's important. Was it an underhand strike? Was it an overhand strike? Was he going forward or was he going backwards? If he's going backwards, obviously one could make an argument that they were retreating when they delivered the final blow. That's important for your self-defense claim. I want to analyze this body weight, how much of your own power, your own energy that you exerted assisted in the penetration of this knife. As I'm going forward or as I'm going backwards, did you attack me on my back leg? That's important. Because see, now that changes everything on your argument for self-defense. Hey, my client was retreating when they stabbed. My client was going forward when they stabbed. The question's gonna be, what was taking place in that moment before the client decided to strike? Was that person being grabbed? Were they being assaulted and then they struck, or did they strike before anyone was being assaulted? That's also just as important, you guys. This case has a lot of missing information in it. And when we get all the information, this is how you want to start examining whether or not this self-defense claim is actually legit. After you have the totality of all the circumstances together in order to paint the proper picture. Because if all these factors are missing and they don't lean in the favor of Karmelo, then what we're gonna have is an excessive use of force. I hope this short explanation may have painted a better picture and a better understanding of all the other mitigating factors that we take in account when looking at whether or not a self-defense claim is actually valid. And did they truly feel in fear of receiving great bodily harm or death, you guys? And so with that, please leave your comments below. Like this video if you enjoyed it. Hit the down button if you did not. That's okay. Let me get your thoughts in the comment section. Until then, the next episode of Crime Classroom. Good night. God bless.